Part 2 of the October Your Mind at Work peer group session. I am going to start sharing my screen. As always, I hope there will be some audience participation in this session. And it occurred to me this morning, Kelly, that I didn't do a poll. I usually do a poll to kick things off, and I don't know why I didn't do a poll. So that for those of you who have come to my sessions before, there's no poll today. But hopefully people will be willing to share and share some of their stories and some of their insights as we talk about self-awareness and self-management. So you may recall, for those of you who are able to join or listen to the recording, last week Pete talked about mindfulness and how being mindful can be helpful to absolutely everything that you do. He threw up some definitions about some of the terms to make sure we're all kind of on the same page. How it talked about metacognition, thinking about your thinking. So being able to sit there and say, oh, right now I'm thinking about, am I doing a good job on this presentation? Meta-awareness, awareness of your awareness. So being aware of whether or not you're aware of what's going on in your body and around you. Self-awareness, which I'll be talking about more today, the capacity to step outside of your own skin and look at yourself with as close an objective eye as possible. So it's really seeing yourself as other people see you, not just as you wish you could be seen. So, oh, I really did say that? Kind of awareness. And then mindfulness, paying close attention to the present in an open and accepting way. So living in the present by being aware of experience as it occurs in real time and accepting what you see. And for those of you, last time, Pete took us through an exercise where for a minute there was no sound, which is scary on a webinar. We had to sit and think about what we were feeling in the chair. Could we feel the springiness of the seat? Could we feel, if we were leaning back, could we feel, is this soft or rough? And our feet on the floor. And so being mindful about the physical sensation, being mindful about your senses, what are you hearing, what are you smelling, that brings your brain into a better, kind of like a better place, right? To be able to enjoy life, interact with life, build better relationships. And by being mindful and self-aware, you can be more aware of what's going on around you and your interactions with others. And hopefully I haven't butchered that too much, Pete.
Not at all.
So self-awareness and self-management, these are two of the aspects of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is your ability to recognize, understand, and manage your own emotions and motivations and what makes you click, what makes your mind click and work. So there's an internal aspect. And then there's an external aspect to emotional intelligence, recognizing, understanding, and influencing the emotions of others. So to be fully emotionally intelligent, you can say, okay, right now I'm feeling nervous, and because I'm nervous, maybe I'm not, interacting the way I would if I was confident. So what can I do? How can I portray more confidence and ease my nervousness? And oh, because I'm nervous, I'm making someone else nervous, then the external piece. And because I'm nervous and I'm making someone else nervous, what impact is that having on our relationship? And if they're nervous or upset or whatever, what can I do to help them get to a more positive emotional state so that we can all get to a better end result of whatever the discussion is or whatever the objective is of the work that we're doing? If anyone has questions, please, raise your hand or just take yourself off mute and jump in.
Actually, Jane, I was gonna add, and it's funny. I was out for a walk last night, and I ran into this lady that I know, and this is kind of exactly what you're talking about. She's just started a new job because she had been off raising her daughter for a while. And she said that the woman that she's working for is, she goes, hovers over her and has this anxiety. And she said she realized she's like a sponge. Joan is my friend's name. Yep. She goes, I feel like I'm like a sponge myself, is that I'm starting to absorb that anxiety that this woman standing over me is portraying. And then I start to feel that. So it's kind of funny how you were you're talking about that. And that was just a kind of an encounter I had yesterday regarding this and how you see that works.
Yeah. And that's a situation where if Joan, your friend, if she is able to calm herself down visibly, that might reflect back, and that might actually calm down the supervisor, right? The boss, the person who's hovering. And it may be that there needs to be a conversation happening. It may just be because Joan's new in the job and the person doesn't trust her yet. So, there could be a lot going on, but emotion it can be like a spiral. It can be a positive spiral. It can be a negative spiral. And if one person starts going down in a negative emotion, it can bring everybody down. It's just the way that the energy comes down. And I'm sure we've all been in a situation where, things are going fine and one person says something and suddenly, oh my goodness, what happened, right? And we do reflect back the emotions that we see in those around us. And so in a total EQ discussion, we'll be getting more into this, I think, in the February session about how to influence others and how to help others, move to a more positive emotional state. But I think it's, Pete's the one who talks mostly about how the brain works, but if you are upset or nervous about something, there has to be a good reason, is what your brain is saying. So I should be nervous about something. And it can spiral down. So thank you, Kelly. Yeah, that's a really, really good example. And I know years ago when I was working in my corporate job at P&G, things, I was at a level where I knew stuff that was going on and my team didn't know, right? Like, oh, we're going to have a major reorganization. And that would be stressing me. And I had to work really hard to not pass that stress down to my team, because, we're still figuring out what does it mean? And there's, all that stuff going on. But I had to make sure that they weren't stressed unnecessarily, especially because I knew my team was all going to be fine, but people on other teams might not be, right? Like, just because that's the nature of reorganizations. And so I had to be very aware of how I was feeling and what I was projecting, and that what was going on in my mind wasn't always being passed on, because, then everyone starts, it just is that spiral. So self-awareness is really understanding. This is, kind of the mindful piece. What's going on? What am I feeling right now? What's motivating me? What's driving me? And then self-management, or the regulation piece, is controlling or directing that appropriately. So disruptive, this talks in kind of negative language, but the disruptive impulses and moods, making sure you're tempering those and sharing appropriately. And another important piece of it is suspending judgment and thinking before acting. And Pete talked a lot about this in the mindfulness session, because you get angry and you just, spew your anger out. That may not be helpful, right? Probably is not helpful. So saying, oh, I'm angry. Why am I angry? Am I angry at them, at the situation? Am I angry at life? Am I angry because I failed? I didn't do something as well as I wanted. And how do I act appropriately? And so we're going to be talking about that today, and digging into these two aspects. And then motivation, social awareness, and social regulation, other aspects of emotional intelligence. We'll be talking more about those later. So let's think a bit about self-awareness, and how aware are you of what you're feeling in the moment? So a little exercise. So besides bad traffic, because that's something that can get everyone angry at times, are there any negative experiences that you have faced? It might be a negative personal experience or a negative professional experience that impacted your performance at work. So take a moment and pick one, and think about, how did you react? And how did that reaction impact the work you were doing, your relationships that you had with others? Did you react poorly, or did you react positively? And if anyone wants to share and be brave, you're quite welcome to.
Jason here.
Thank you, Jason.
I can't It's funny. I mean, to be very open and transparent, I think like a lot of people in work, you sort of have that professional brain.
Yes.
You sort of just compartmentalize. But there have been times in my life where my hindbrain is kicking in and it's fight or flight. And I'm cerebrally telling myself, okay, hindbrain, you've got to stop so I can think, but I can't access like my cerebral front cortex is where the decisions are. But it's gone. It's I can't access it, and I'm like doing the headlights.
Yeah.
Right.
And the important first step, Jason, there is you have recognized that is happening. Some people don't recognize that's happening until, you know, much time later, they kind of go, oh yeah, I wasn't thinking clearly. So recognizing, oh, you know, the part of my brain that makes intelligent decisions isn't working very well right now. And we're going to talk about amygdala hijacking, which is what's going on there. That's step one. And then step two is we'll be talking about what do you do about it? How do you learn some techniques to manage that? Anyone else want to share a story?
I'll share a story from a couple of years ago because I hope I could behave better today. A couple of years ago, we'd just completed the salary increases at Next Dimension, and we'd announced them to everybody in the organization. And a member of staff approached me and asked to talk to me, and basically started on this whinging and whining path. And I'm using those words deliberately because that's how I felt at the time, about I really deserve more than this. I've been with the company all these years, blah, 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 blah. And it was classic playing the victim. I mean, I recognized it for what it was, but what I also recognized was at that moment, I started to judge him, because I started to think to myself, the little voice in my head was going, you're pathetic. This is absolutely crap, basically. Excuse my French, everyone. So now, if the same scenario played out today, I would take a step back and say, okay, this is the situation. This is the way this person feels. I'm not going to judge them. I'm going to be self-aware. I'm going to control my emotions. I'm not going to think this person is playing the victim and whinging, and I'm not going to judge them in the same way. I'm going to ask them questions about why they feel so strongly after just having received a pay increase, which apparently wasn't enough. So hindsight is a wonderful thing, but I knew back then I was actually judging him very badly. So that's my story.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and the judgment piece where you're feeling things and you look for external causes, right? Instead of pointing the finger at yourself and saying, oh, I'm actually part of the problem here, maybe all the problem, right? But I'm the one who's able to say, I need to stop judging. I need to understand where this person's coming from because they have a perspective that's different from mine. Let me understand their perspective. And then once I understand their perspective, then I can share my perspective. We can move to hopefully a productive, positive resolution, as opposed to the individual just being very grumpy and unhappy, and and could potentially then be bad talking and saying awful things, and potentially, right, depending on whether or not they felt heard. So I know, there have been times when it's like there's just stuff going on at home, kids are sick or the parents are sick or whatever, and I come to work and I'm not fully engaged at work, and I'm, it's like it's easy to take out personal stresses at work if you're not careful, right? It's because just your brain is just working and dealing with things. So if you aren't aware of how you're feeling and then managing it, it can definitely have a negative impact. And so thank you, Jason and Pete, for sharing. One of the things when you're thinking about how you're feeling is the concept of emotional temperature. Right now, would you say your emotional temperature is calm and cool in the green? Or is there stuff going on that, you're maybe more in the yellow, orange, red, because, you got up and the coffee maker didn't turn on, so the coffee wasn't ready, and then you spilt the milk, and then the dog ate your slippers and, you know, and you're coming and you're sitting down and you're like, I'm already stressed. I'm already angry at the world. So think a bit about how you're feeling now. And now I'm going to show you a bunch of images. And with these images, I want you to think with each of them, see if you can name how you're feeling. What is your emotional temperature? Okay. How did you feel? And what do you feel? Does anyone want to share what they were feeling as they were looking at those images?
I think my feelings reflected what I was seeing on the screen. You know, if the baby was crying, I was wanting to comfort type of thing, or, you know, the roller coaster, that's a real fear of me, for me, and feel anxious. I could just remember going up to the top of one and not wanting to go over that edge, you know. But, you know, the cat ones, and the, you know, the smiling baby and the beautiful sunsets and those types of things, of course, you feel happy or calm.
Yeah, thank you, Lois. Yeah, I tried not to have anything that would be too extremely negative and triggering. So but some of them are a little more potentially negative, right? And it might be different for different people. So there might be someone on the call who'd be like, "Oh yeah, roller coaster! Can't wait till I can get back to Wonderland," and you're going, "Ah."
I was definitely one. I'm willing to go on the roller coaster, but even the baby crying, in that moment, I thought, okay, that is fine, because it's the lighting in the picture was a day, wasn't night. If the baby was crying at night, I would have felt differently. But the baby's crying, okay, it's normal. It's supposed to do it. So.
And thank you for pointing out the difference between, yeah, baby crying if it was night versus day, because that's another example of how I saw a baby crying and my judgment was that, well, everyone's going to be upset by a picture of a baby crying. And I'm like, oh yeah, you know what? Yeah, baby crying during the day, it's not like you're going to let them scream for an hour, right? You know, but they might be hungry, they might need a diaper change. That's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
You know, yes, you're going to get there, but that might be different from the middle of the night. Mm-hmm. That's really see, this is where I'm like, oh, I had a judgment on that image and what emotion it might evoke. And you've taught me something new. Mm-hmm. Thank you. And anyone else want to share?
I'll share something. I've done different emotional noting, so I was thinking of that. But I got up early this morning and I watched the session that you had on Thursday, because I've got something going on Thursdays.
Yeah.
You know, so I actually came to this meeting calm. So I wasn't as impacted by the pictures. You know, funny enough, you know, and I think you've seen me not calm. You know, yesterday when we were talking about his project management debt, I was not calm. You know, so sometimes it's just, I guess that's what I've become aware of, is where I'm starting from makes a difference too. Not just, not just having a picture, you know, which is why I do mindfulness things, so that I do I call it cultivate calm. I got that from Brene Brown.
Mm. Thank you. Yeah. So that's because your emotional temperature to start was in that calm green. The emotional roller coaster would have been less intense. If someone was already upset about something, then seeing those images or having external things happening, the emotional roller coaster might be more intense. And driving in traffic, you know, if you are going to get to your meeting a half an hour early Someone cuts you off, you go, okay, I guess he or she's in a greater rush than I am. If you're going to get to an important meeting 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late, and you get cut off, you're like, get out of my way. I've got to, what are you doing? Right? And so your pre-stage and how you're feeling is going to impact your reaction to what's going on around you. Because I've definitely had days when I've been cut off and I've thought things about the person that I shouldn't have thought, and I had to stop and go, they're obviously in more of a rush than you are, Jane. Even and you know, if I'm late, it's my fault that I'm late, right? Not their fault.
Yeah.
And then there are times where I'm like, yeah, okay, go ahead. Oh yeah, it's, you know. So that's a good point, that where you're starting from is also going to impact what you're feeling. So there are 7 basic emotions, and each of these can be felt in various levels of intensity. And there are, you know, many words to describe the nuances of each of these. But basically, joy, which is pleasure or delight. So you might have felt joy when you saw the smiling baby. Surprise, when you discover suddenly and unexpectedly, you discover something and you've got the kind of response. Sadness, when you're feeling or showing sorrow. There's fear, so getting to the top of the roller coaster, to Lois's point, would be fear. Contempt, disregard for someone, or a feeling of worthlessness. So that feeling of worthlessness is contempt for yourself. Anger, displeasure or hostility, and disgust, profound disapproval. And these 7 basic emotions cross all cultures, you know, all lives, all different stages of life. And the ability to name your emotions is important to helping you control and manage what you express. And so amygdala hijacking is basically, Jason, what you're talking about before. So emotions drive everything we do, because you feel before you can think, and you need to think, you know, before you can act. And when something negative happens, it can take, the research shows, anywhere between 3 and 5 positive things need to happen to counteract the impact of one negative thing. And it can take up to 4 hours for you to get back to a more positive state when something negative has happened. And this disrupts your ability to make decisions and to function. So Jason, to your point, it's like, you know that the prefrontal cortex isn't working right. So it's basically, and this can be both with positive, extreme positive emotion, or extreme negative emotion. When you have a high emotion, your amygdala basically takes control and your higher level thinking is disabled. And when that happens, your brain does not process. So I know when if I am angry, upset with something, and if you ask me a question, I'm like, I don't even understand the question, let alone how to formulate what my answer might be. So, and you know, I've had situations at work, had situations personally where something has triggered me, and you know, the amygdala just takes over, and I'm like, I cannot function right now. And so knowing how to deal with that is what we're going to be getting into. But you do need to be self-aware. So some ways that you can build your self-awareness of how you're feeling is learning to describe your emotional temperature. So thinking of that thermometer and simply saying, you know, do you feel hot? Do you feel warm? Do you feel cold? Or are you seeing red? That's, I'm sure, a phrase people have heard before, when they're seeing red, when they're very angry. Do you see cloudy, where it's kind of like, okay, you know, I'm not, think things are not great, but they're not horrible in terms of how I'm feeling? Or are things clear? It's kind of that clear and calm. Some people will describe how they're feeling using red, yellow, or green lights. So thinking of a street light. Thinking, is their brain working really fast, or is it working slowly? So fast means you're probably not thinking clearly. If your brain is more on the slow, if you're thinking, okay, I'm feeling slower, that means your brain's able to process and you have control of your emotions. You can describe your emotions as positive, neutral, or negative. You can, you know, some people will use, you know, just happy faces and sad faces, because being able to say in the moment, okay, yeah, I'm seeing a red light. That's step one. And then step two is, now what do I do about it so that I don't destroy the relationship I have? And learning how to do this. And this takes practice. And so tracking how you feel
But you can
on
do
a
it in
regular
6 minutes,
basis.
you said.
So tracking how you feel on a regular basis can be helpful, because it's then training you to recognize what you're feeling. And so, what did you feel? You can use a journal. Some people, there are a lot of apps available, mood tracker apps that you can use, where it'll prompt you periodically to, oh, what am I feeling right now? Is it a positive, is a negative emotion? How would I name it? How intense is it? Am I just a little bit happy? Am I extremely happy? Thinking about what caused or triggered those emotions, particularly with negative emotions. Understanding what the triggers are. So I know that there are certain people in my life who are going to trigger a negative emotion for me. They're going to say stuff, they're going to do stuff that's just going to drive me crazy. So knowing that when I go into a conversation with them means I can prepare myself to make sure I'm calm, and to make sure I'm telling myself, it doesn't matter, Jane, that, that's just the way they are. Just get past that. Just don't listen to, good thing is criticism from parents, right? Just don't listen to it and just get on with the discussion. So recognizing what triggers a negative emotion helps you to be prepared when you know that situation's going to come.
Jane, sorry,
yeah,
just to jump in on that, because I think that's a really good point. And some of those things, because I know there's certain people that are like that, I know that I have to come into it in a calmer frame of mind.
Yeah.
Like if I have to talk to them on the phone, or if I have to deal with them a certain way, I know that I have to kind of take that breath. I can't already be elevated.
Perfect.
Because because even if I'm calm, everything that they say and do is going to tick me off. So, but I know then that I have to come at it. And to your point, to me, it's like, okay, I know that they're like that. Right. And if they've caught you off guard, it just makes things way worse.
Right. And so there are some people who are more negative. There are some people who are more positive, just generally, right? We have optimists and pessimists. And so some of those people who are a little bit more negative, number one, they should learn something about emotional intelligence. But anyway, exactly, being able to go in and be prepared for the meeting, the conversation, the discussion, whatever. And sometimes it's, personal stuff, and sometimes it's professional. So understanding what those triggers is really important. And there are a lot of ways you can do this. As I said, there are apps. I know some people, they'll have a spreadsheet and they have a timer, and every 15 or 20 minutes, it's like, okay, on my spreadsheet, how am I doing? And then it color codes things for them. Putting in their calendar, if you use a paper and pencil calendar, jot it down. Doing daily reflections and journaling at the end of the day. What did I feel today? What made me feel good? What made me feel less good? Can be helpful. And exercising, although not too intently, to Kelly's point earlier today, as you get older, but exercising regularly, that produces endorphins, that produces feel-good chemicals, and that will help you feel better in general, because you've got those feel-good chemicals in your brain. And when you're exercising, you can be mindful when you're exercising. Think about, if it's a walk, just think about every step you're taking and how does it feel? And think about the trees around you and, oh, I hear some birds. Can I see those birds? And just being mindful when you're exercising, or, you're on the treadmill or your bike or whatever. How are my muscles feeling? How am I feeling? All of that helps to build your awareness of how you're feeling in the moment. Excuse me. Once you are aware of what you're feeling, you need to manage it. And, some of the images here are people who have not managed or regulated their emotions particularly well. And then somewhere there's more positive. Hopefully, we don't have too many of the left-hand images happening on a regular basis. Thinking about the negative experience earlier and how you reacted, or pick a new experience, is there a time when you know you could have reacted better? And Pete, Pete shared that he was listening and thinking some not very complimentary things about the individual who was saying that he or she needed more money. And Pete, in hindsight, has learned about what he could have done differently. Does anyone have an example of something that, with hindsight, they're saying, yeah, I could have handled that a little bit differently?
Jane, I can share. I know in certain situations, and it would happen several times, I just need to take a moment and maybe just take that breath, count to 5, and come back at it. Because sometimes what happens is if I just go right away, then maybe what I should not have maybe said what I said. And then I think of it afterwards, and had I just kind of taken that breath or just go, you know what, I can't deal with this right now. I'll come back at it in a couple of minutes. And I think a lot of times, obviously growing up with my kids in sports a lot, you have a 24-hour rule in place with a lot of things. If you're trying to address something and you come back at it later, sometimes you don't have that luxury. But even if it's just taking a breath and going through, and sometimes too, the other is just writing things down, things that you've got to address, because then you can get your points across as long as you're prepared. It's not something that's happened really fast.
Yeah, good. Those are good points. It's really all about taking even a very short period of time to just kind of catch your breath. And one thing, if it's like with email, it's like, write the email that you really want to send in your heart of hearts, and then hit delete. Like, don't send it. Wait, calm down. But it's kind of like, get all the anger, the frustration, the how could you be so stupid to say blah, get that out of your system. And then you can write the calm, polite, intelligent, productive email back, or the productive response. And yeah, Kelly, your point, to write notes if you need to have a difficult conversation with someone. Have a script, practice the script. So so it's like, okay, these are the points I want to make, and this is how I'm going to not get emotional in the conversation. So it's a calm conversation.
Yeah, actually, to that point, we're trying to help guide our son through something, because he's got somebody who works for him who really is an idiot. Like, he just he's doing everything wrong, and Zach has gone through and told him so many times. So he's having a meeting with him, and that's what we said is, take everything down, document everything, write everything down, so that you can go through all the points. Because if not, then just looking at his face is going to make you really angry.
Yeah.
And you won't be able to calmly go through things. So I think that's, it's a good exercise. And I have done the same thing. I don't put it in an email, Jane. I put it in a Word document, so I don't accidentally
safer. That is
send.
actually safer, Kelly. Yes.
Yeah, because I have written those, and then I just feel really good.
Yeah. And
then I, reword it. But a Word document, so you don't hit.
That's a very good point. Yes, I put it in a Word document, because that also, putting things, whether it's physically on paper or typing in a Word document, that gives you clarity on the emotions you're feeling. And that can give you some clarity on, oh, maybe I'm being a little extreme, right? It gives you times like to start to give the other person a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, start to think about, well, where are they coming from? What might their perspective be? And it can give you the opportunity to structure and understand if you are catastrophizing something that isn't really a catastrophe, right? It's like, oh, I am making mountains out of molehills. Okay, let me deal with this as a molehill, because that's all it really is. So yes, Word document versus email.
Sorry, Jane, Ryan has his hand up, so I don't know whether.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you, Ryan. Sorry.
I'm going the other way. Sometimes it feels good, and sometimes it's needed to not take the high road. And most of us would probably agree, for myself, most of my blow-ups with colleagues or family members was when I was young. I would say 22 and under.
Okay.
And
Yep,
obviously we've come a long way with emotional intelligence and understanding how words actually affect people. But back then, people went at it, and sometimes it needed to happen, and sometimes it's that wake up call. But I think it was a lot of it was when we were younger. Today, I don't react like I do. Like 23 years, I have totally changed my perspective. It's because I didn't understand the impact of words and what things are said. And then I've had back onto me as well. So it's been give or take. But I think sometimes blowouts need to happen, because sometimes that brings out the bigger issue that then gets discussed versus other ways. So that's my 2 cents.
thank you.
Jason's nodding. He's probably got some good blowouts.
Well, and and so there are a couple of things there. One is the prefrontal cortex does not get fully developed till you're about 25.
I say it's probably 40 now.
Well, and so it might be even later. But so, when you are a child, a teenager, and even well into your 20s, your higher reasoning function and your ability to truly understand other people, how they might be feeling, what your impact is going to be, it's not fully developed yet. That's why teenagers do stupid things. Things as adults, we think, well, how on earth could you ever have thought that was a smart thing to do? It's like, well, because their brain is not developed yet, right? So that could certainly be part of it. As we mature, we get a little bit smarter about some of these things. And yet I'm not advocating avoiding. It's how do you share? And I think there are times when, as you say, because it led to what the bigger issue was. There was a blow up, led to a bigger issue. My question would be, was there a way to get to that bigger issue without having such an intense blow up? There may or may not have been, but it's hard to tell in hindsight.
Just a quick comment on that. I think sometimes it comes to it's a different kind of word, but in the role, if you're a manager, it's managerial courage to actually say something. And sometimes it just bottles up and it becomes an explosion, where if you had that courage in the moment, it probably is better dealt with than keeping it back and not saying anything till it does become a problem.
Yeah. Yes. And so avoiding an issue, it can escalate over time if you're nipping it in the bud. Because sometimes the person goes, I had no clue that I'm not supposed to do that, or I had no, they didn't know, and so they keep this bad behavior. Sometimes it's harder than that, the educational process they need to go through and the learning they need to do. So yeah, it's avoidance forever is generally not a good thing, right? But so getting that discussion in there quickly. So one way is to help you build your ability to manage your own emotions. First, make a commitment to yourself that you're going to get better at this. Even if you think you're already good, there are probably times when you're like, yeah, I could have handled that a little differently. So commit that you are going to work on this. Practice mindfulness, and identify techniques, and I'll be talking about some that you can use in the moment. So that's on the next slide. Journaling, I talked about that in terms of understanding self-awareness, but also management. Identifying the triggers, as I talked about, learn to avoid the negative triggers. Think, how did you feel? What did you do about it? What impact did that have on the goals you want to achieve or the result you wanted to get to? If the blow up led to a complete breakdown in a working team and the team can no longer function, then you're not going to accomplish the objective, right? And so understanding that sometimes things are going to take you down a path that you don't want to go to, and think about how you could respond differently. So this is learning from your actions. Oh, I did this, I could have handled it maybe if I had tried that, and then the next time the situation comes up, I'm going to try something different. I just like this quote: if you can't tell what you desperately need, it's probably sleep. Lack of sleep can definitely lead people to not use their higher thinking functions. So when you're tired, your brain doesn't work very well, and you are more likely to react inappropriately in stressful situations. So when you're in the moment and someone has, said something, done something, okay, Fabio, I see your question. We'll get back to that. Thank you. So when something happens and you're just, it's the steam is starting to come out of your ears, right? Things you can say to yourself, is this the worst thing that can happen? Is this going to, is someone going to die? Is the building burning down? Is this the worst thing that can happen? Or am I making this a mountain when it's really a molehill? Kelly mentioned count to 5, count to 10. We've all heard that before. Count backwards, count in another language. What this does is it forces your brain to think about something other than what the trigger is. And as you force your brain to think about something that's calming, so counting is kind of a neutral thing, right? It can bring down your emotional response so that you can get to a more productive place. Slow down, breathe, focus on your breath, even if it's just one. That gets different chemicals going in your brain. Think about physical sensation for a few seconds, wiggling your toes, and what does it feel like to wiggle your toes, or rubbing your fingertips together and feeling the ridges. These sound kind of silly, but they are disrupting the chemicals and the neurons that are firing saying, I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry. And it disrupts that so that you can move to a more positive place. How do your feet feel on the floor, or how do you feel in the chair? Thinking about a sound far off. So I'll sometimes take a second and just like, what's the farthest sound I can hear? Oh yeah, there's some kind of construction going on. Or can I smell anything? All of these things are little tiny mindfulness moments to bring you back into a bit more positive place. And I'm sure there's a lot more. This is just a very high level list of things. And then, remembering pause. So from Pete's session last week, where he had pause mindfulness, taking the space of mind where we consider the options and choose the most appropriate one. Pete talked about reacting, which is, blah, and you just, you do the blow up, versus responding, saying, okay, what are the appropriate words I can use, and choosing the appropriate response. And it's all about choice. Laura, you have your hand up?
I was looking for I was going to say the one thing about a lot of this stuff is it's okay to be angry. Like, I mean, that's the thing. It's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to take your anger out on someone else, right? So yeah. It's kind of, I guess the pause to me is like not acknowledging the emotion isn't good either.
Right.
Right. So yeah. Acknowledging the emotion and letting the wave go through you. The pause gives you that moment, but you can still be angry and have a constructive conversation with someone.
Yes. Oh, yes. Because just bottling everything up, it's not helpful either.
Yeah.
And so it's, and so it comes to choose if you will or will not share. Is it helpful to share? Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. Is it helpful to getting us to our goal? Is it helpful to the relationship? Practice empathy. Think about, well, how will my sharing help or hurt the other person? So how might they feel? How would I feel if I was on the receiving end of what I think I'm about to do to the other person, right? And we'll be talking more about that in February as well. Remembering, so that I love this quote as well. I will have to remember, I am here today to cross the swamp, not to fight all the alligators. What do you want to accomplish? And you don't necessarily need to take on every single fight, at least not in the moment, right? So to Lori's point, it's okay to be angry. Like it's okay to have negative emotions. It's okay to have positive emotions. If it's appropriate to share, think about what is a constructive way to share and when is the best time. So if you're in a team meeting and you're angry with someone, do you yell at them in front of everyone? Do you find a way in front of everyone to address it politely? Or do you take them aside later and constructively explain what you were, share what you were feeling and the impact it had on you and the impact it had on the dynamics? So it comes down to choice of how you behave. And this all takes practice, right? Thinking back, when have I done this well? When have I not done this well? What might have been more constructive? So practice, do some of that self-awareness. So the meta-awareness, the meta-cognition, where learning to think about what you're thinking about. So when you're sitting there and you're getting angry and saying, oh, I'm getting angry and I'm thinking about I could do this or I could do this. Oh, option B is the more constructive right now. Well, let me do option B. And it takes time. In November, and it's not Thursday, November 17th anymore, apparently. It's now Tuesday, the 15th.
Yeah.
Pete's going to talk about brain energy and decision making and how everything you do uses energy in your brain. Neurons are firing. So sitting and listening takes energy. Thinking takes energy. So Pete's going to talk about that, and then I'm going to take that and apply it to prioritizing and decision making at work and how we deal with that. So